In the quiet town of Willow Creek, Ohio, Marcus Reed worked long hours at a food factory while his wife Angela sewed clothes to support their family. Their 5-year-old son, Noah, waited all week for Saturday when his father promised to take him to the supermarket before Christmas. But a simple mistake. A toy dinosaur forgotten at checkout triggers an alarm and turns a joyful moment into suspicion, accusations, and a story that spreads far beyond the store. What follows will test a father's love and remind an entire community about fairness, dignity, and how we treat one another. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. The Weekend Wish. Winter arrived early in Willow Creek, Ohio, a quiet American town where the streets were lined with maple trees and small brick houses. In December, the town always seemed to slow down. Christmas lights hung from shop windows, soft music played from old speakers in the square, and a thin layer of snow rested on rooftops like powdered sugar. It was the kind of place where people greeted each other by name at the grocery store and where the glow of holiday lights made the cold evenings feel warmer. In a modest apartment near the edge of town lived the Reed family. Marcus Reed was the father. He was a 34-year-old black man, tall and broad-shouldered from years of physical work. His skin was a deep, warm brown, and his face carried the quiet seriousness of someone who had learned early in life that responsibility rarely took a day off. His hair was kept short and neat, and a faint line of tiredness often rested under his dark eyes after long shifts at the factory. Marcus rarely spoke loudly, but when he did, his voice was calm and steady. People who knew him described him as patient, the kind of man who thought carefully before acting. He worked at Willow Creek Food Packaging Plant, a small factory that produced canned soups and boxed meals shipped across the state. The job was repetitive, lifting, stacking, sealing boxes, but Marcus never complained. Every hour he worked, every overtime shift he accepted, he told himself the same thing. It's for Noah. Marcus had grown up without much. His own father had worked 2 jobs but still struggled to provide. That memory stayed with him, shaping the way he lived his life now. He believed in something simple. A child should never feel alone in the world. And Noah Reed was the center of his world. Noah was 5 years old, small for his age, with soft, dark brown skin and large, curious eyes that always seemed to be studying everything around him. His hair was a cloud of tight curls that Angela carefully combed every morning before school. Noah's face had a gentle roundness to it, the kind that made strangers smile when they saw him. But Noah was not a loud child. He was quiet. At Willow Creek Preschool, where colorful drawings filled the walls and the scent of crayons lingered in the air, most children spent their days laughing, running, and inventing games together. Noah often watched from the edge of the room. While the other children built towers with blocks or chased each other across the playground, Noah usually sat at a small table near the window with a sheet of paper and a box of crayons, and every day, without fail, he drew the same thing. A dinosaur? Not just any dinosaur. A green one with friendly eyes and short arms standing proudly on 2 legs. Noah had given it a name. Buddy. The only person who had noticed the pattern right away was his teacher, Emily Turner. Emily Turner was 28 years old, with light brown hair that fell just past her shoulders and warm hazel eyes that carried a quiet kindness. She had the relaxed posture of someone who preferred listening to speaking, and children tended to trust her quickly. Emily was of average height and slender build, often dressed in simple sweaters and long skirts that matched the calm atmosphere she tried to create in her classroom. Emily had grown up in Willow Creek herself. Her mother had been a school librarian, and Emily spent much of her childhood surrounded by books and quiet afternoons. Those years shaped her personality, gentle, observant, and deeply patient with children who felt overlooked. She noticed things other people missed, like Noah sitting alone. One afternoon, she walked over to his table and knelt beside him. "What are you drawing today, Noah?" she asked softly. Noah looked up, holding a green crayon tightly. "Buddy." Emily smiled. "Buddy again." Noah nodded. He's my friend. Emily studied the drawing. The dinosaur was always the same shape, the same bright green color. Does Buddy talk to you? She asked gently. Noah shrugged. Sometimes. Emily didn't ask more questions. She simply nodded and pinned the drawing on the classroom wall with the others. Across town, while Noah was finishing another picture of Buddy, Marcus was ending his shift at the factory. The evening air outside the building was sharp and cold, carrying the smell of snow. Workers poured out of the metal doors in thick jackets and work boots. Marcus rubbed his hands together for warmth. As he walked down the sidewalk toward his old pickup truck, someone called out behind him. Marcus. The voice belonged to George Miller. George Miller was Marcus's neighbor, a man in his late 70s who had lived in Willow Creek longer than most residents could remember. George was tall, but slightly stooped now, with a thin frame and weathered skin that carried deep lines from decades of outdoor work. His silver hair was cut short beneath a worn brown cap, and his pale blue eyes had the sharp alertness of someone who had seen difficult times. George had once served as a soldier many years ago, though he rarely spoke about it. After the war, he returned to Willow Creek and built a quiet life repairing houses and helping neighbors with odd jobs. People respected him not because he spoke often, but because when he did, his words usually carried weight. Marcus liked George. The old man had a way of speaking honestly without judgment. You heading home? George asked. Marcus nodded. Angela's cooking tonight. George chuckled. Lucky man. Then his expression softened. How's the boy? Marcus leaned against the truck door. He's good. Quiet, though. George nodded slowly as if that confirmed something he already suspected. Kids grow in their own time, George said. Just make sure he knows you're there. Marcus smiled faintly. That part I won't mess up. A few blocks away, Angela Reed was finishing her shift at Willow Creek Garment Works. Angela Reed was 31 years old, with warm brown skin and expressive dark eyes that seemed to carry both strength and kindness at the same time. She stood slightly shorter than Marcus, with a slim but sturdy build from long hours at sewing machines. Her hair was usually tied into a low bun while she worked, and her hands moved with careful precision, guiding fabric under the humming needle of the machine. Angela had always been the optimistic one in the family. While Marcus often carried the quiet weight of responsibility, Angela carried hope. She believed small moments mattered. Family dinners, laughter in the kitchen, bedtime stories. That evening, she stopped by a small grocery shop on her way home. Inside her bag were a few ingredients for something special: roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, and a small apple pie. She wanted to cook an early Christmas dinner for the weekend, something warm and comforting for Marcus and Noah, because Marcus had promised Noah something important. Earlier that week, as Noah put away his school shoes, Marcus had knelt beside him. If you behave all week, Marcus had said, smiling, I'll take you to the big supermarket on Saturday. Noah's eyes had widened. The big one. Marcus nodded. And you can pick one toy. That promise had become Noah's entire week. Every morning at school, every quiet drawing of Buddy, every moment of patience had been leading to that single idea. Saturday, and a toy. Back in the apartment that night, Angela stirred a pot of stew while Noah sat on the floor drawing again. What are you making this time? She asked. Noah held up the paper proudly. Buddy the dinosaur. Angela smiled. That dinosaur again? Noah nodded. Buddy's coming to the store with us. Angela laughed softly. Well, then I hope Buddy likes supermarkets. Later that night, Marcus came home, his boots leaving small patches of melted snow near the door. Noah ran to him immediately. Dad, is it Saturday yet? Marcus laughed and lifted him into the air. Not yet, Buddy. But it's coming. Noah grinned, because in his mind, Saturday wasn't just a day, it was the day Buddy might become real. And outside, beyond the apartment windows, snow continued falling softly over Willow Creek. Christmas was getting closer. The winter supermarket. Saturday arrived with a pale winter sun hanging low over Willow Creek. The morning snow from the night before had settled into soft white patches along the sidewalks and rooftops, and the town carried that quiet holiday feeling that only came a few days before Christmas. Cars moved slowly along Maple Street, their tires crunching over thin ice. Shop windows glowed with red ribbons and golden lights, and somewhere in the distance, a radio played an old Christmas song that seemed to drift through the cold air. Inside the Reed apartment, Noah had been awake long before the alarm clock. The 5-year-old sat cross-legged on the living room floor, his curly hair still messy from sleep. He was wearing a small red sweater Angela had bought from the thrift store the previous winter. In his hands was a piece of paper and a green crayon. Buddy, the dinosaur, appeared again on the page. Noah carefully colored the big round body and the friendly eyes. Then he whispered to the drawing, "Today, you're coming with me." Marcus watched from the kitchen doorway, holding a cup of coffee. He had woken up early too, though his body still carried the heaviness of a full week of factory work. Even on weekends, his shoulders seemed used to the weight of boxes and metal shelves. Angela stood beside the stove preparing breakfast. She had tied her hair back into a loose bun and wore a soft gray sweater dusted with flour from mixing biscuit dough. Her movements were quick and practiced. Years of long shifts at the garment factory had made her hands efficient and steady. "Someone looks excited," she said with a smile as she glanced toward Noah. "He's been ready since 6, Marcus replied quietly. Noah jumped up when he heard his father's voice. "Dad, is it time?" Marcus set his coffee down and crouched to Noah's level. "Almost eat breakfast first. The supermarket isn't going anywhere." Noah nodded seriously as if this were an important rule he fully understood. Angela placed 3 plates on the table, the small kitchen filled with the smell of warm biscuits and eggs. For a few minutes the apartment felt peaceful, just the quiet clink of forks and the soft hum of the heater fighting the winter cold. Before they left, Angela knelt in front of Noah and zipped up his blue winter jacket. "Stay close to your dad in the store, okay?" she said gently. Noah nodded again. "I will." Marcus grabbed the car keys and pulled on his dark coat. As they stepped outside, cold air rushed into their lungs, sharp and clean. The old pickup truck started with a low rumble. Their destination was Maple Market, the largest supermarket in Willow Creek. The store stood near the highway at the edge of town, a bright building surrounded by rows of parked cars. Strings of white Christmas lights hung along the roofline, and a tall plastic Santa waved slowly above the entrance. Inside, the atmosphere was warm and busy. Holiday music floated from speakers in the ceiling, and the aisles were crowded with families preparing for Christmas dinners. The scent of fresh bread mixed with pine decorations and candy displays. Noah held Marcus's hand tightly as they stepped through the sliding doors. His eyes widened. To a 5-year-old, Maple Market felt enormous. They walked through the produce section first. Marcus picked up potatoes, carrots, and a small bag of apples for Angela's cooking. Noah watched everything with fascination. The tall shelves, the bright packaging, the carts rattling across the floor. But he was waiting for one place. The toy aisle. Marcus could see the anticipation building in his son's face. "All right," he said finally. "Let's go find your toy." The toy aisle stood near the back of the store, decorated with red bows and cardboard snowmen. Plastic trucks, dolls, puzzles, and stuffed animals lined the shelves from floor to ceiling. Noah stepped forward slowly, as if entering a magical place. Then he saw it. On the 3rd shelf sat a soft, green, stuffed dinosaur. It had round, friendly eyes, tiny arms, and a wide-stitched smile. The color was almost identical to the crayon drawings Noah had been making all week. Noah froze. His mouth opened slightly. Marcus noticed immediately. "That one?" he asked. Noah nodded slowly. "That's Buddy." Marcus picked up the dinosaur and examined it. The toy was simple. Soft fabric, light stuffing, probably made cheaply in some faraway factory. But to Noah it looked like the most important thing in the world. Marcus knelt down and handed it to him. "Well," he said, smiling gently, "you kept your promise all week." Noah hugged the dinosaur to his chest. "Thank you, Dad." Marcus chuckled and suddenly moved the toy playfully. "Wait," he whispered dramatically. "Buddy might escape." He guided the stuffed dinosaur toward Noah's jacket. "Quick, hide him!" Noah giggled as Marcus tucked the dinosaur halfway inside the front of his jacket like a secret passenger. "Buddy's hiding," Noah whispered. Marcus laughed softly. "Then we better finish shopping before he runs away." While Marcus pushed the cart through the remaining aisles collecting a few groceries, milk, bread, chicken, and a small pie Angela had mentioned, Noah kept one hand inside his jacket holding the dinosaur. He leaned his head down and whispered quietly, "Buddy, you're coming home with me." At the front of the store stood several checkout counters. One of them was operated by Lily Chen, a young cashier who had recently started working at Maple Market. Lily was 22 years old, petite and slender with straight black hair cut just below her chin. Her dark eyes carried a calm attentiveness, the kind of look people developed after spending long hours observing customers pass through their line. Lily had moved to Willow Creek 2 years earlier after finishing community college. Her parents ran a small restaurant in another town, and she often helped them growing up. Because of that, she had learned early how to read people, who was impatient, who was nervous, and who simply needed kindness. Marcus rolled the cart toward her counter. "Evening," Lily said politely. "Evening," Marcus replied. She scanned the groceries one by one, the red light of the scanner flashing over each barcode. Noah stood quietly beside the cart, still holding the dinosaur hidden under his jacket. Lily noticed the boy's excited expression. "Did you find something fun today?" she asked. Noah nodded shyly. Marcus paid with cash and gathered the grocery bags. "Have a good night," Lily said with a small smile. "Thank you," Marcus replied. They walked toward the store exit. The sliding doors opened automatically as they approached, letting in a brief gust of cold winter air. Outside, the parking lot lights had already turned on, casting long reflections across the thin layer of snow. Noah looked down at the dinosaur inside his jacket and whispered again, "Buddy, from now on, you're my friend." He hugged the toy closer. Marcus adjusted the grocery bags in his arms and walked beside him toward the truck. Behind them, inside Maple Market, another employee stood watching the entrance. His name was Jason Cole, the store's security guard. Jason Cole was 39 years old, tall with a heavy build and broad chest. His short blonde hair was cut close to the scalp, and a faint scar ran across his chin from an old accident. He wore a dark security jacket with the Maple Market logo stitched above the pocket. Jason had once worked as a private security contractor before returning to Willow Creek after a series of difficult jobs that left him tired and impatient with people. Over time, he had grown suspicious of small details. Hands moving too quickly, customers looking around too often, bags that seemed too full. In the past month, several items had gone missing from the store. Management had warned him. "Watch everything carefully," they had said. So Jason watched, and as Marcus and Noah walked toward the exit with their groceries, Jason noticed something, a small shape inside the boy's jacket. The alarm. The cold air of the Maple Market parking lot rushed toward Marcus and Noah as the automatic doors slid open behind them. Snowflakes drifted lazily under the yellow glow of the parking lot lights, and the distant sound of traffic hummed along the highway beyond the shopping center. Marcus carried 2 grocery bags in one hand and reached for his truck keys with the other. Noah walked beside him, small boots crunching lightly on the thin layer of snow, one hand still tucked inside his jacket where the soft green dinosaur rested against his chest. For a moment, everything felt ordinary. Then the alarm sounded. A sharp electronic screech burst from the doorway behind them, loud and sudden enough to make several shoppers turn their heads. The red security sensors beside the exit flashed as the sound echoed through the entrance hall. Marcus stopped immediately. He turned halfway around, confused. Noah froze beside him, startled by the noise. Inside the store, several people paused with their carts. A few whispered to each other while looking toward the entrance. And then Jason Cole moved, Jason had been standing a few steps inside the building near the security station when the alarm triggered. His heavy boots hit the floor quickly as he stepped forward, his tall frame moving with a kind of controlled urgency that came from years of security work. His expression was serious, his pale blue eyes narrowed slightly as he studied the pair at the door. "Sir," Jason said firmly, raising one hand. Marcus turned toward him. "Yes?" Jason stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away. Up close, his broad shoulders and square jaw gave him an imposing presence. The black security jacket he wore seemed tight across his chest, emphasizing his physical size. "I need you to come back inside for a moment," Jason said. Marcus frowned slightly. "Is there a problem?" Jason glanced briefly at Noah, then back at Marcus. "The alarm was triggered when you passed through the sensors." Marcus looked confused, but nodded calmly. "All right." He guided Noah back into the entrance area where the warm air of the supermarket replaced the cold outside. Shoppers continued moving around them, though some slowed their steps to watch. Jason pointed toward a small space near the customer service desk. "Let's step over here." Marcus followed without resistance. Noah stayed close, gripping the front of his jacket. Jason's eyes dropped briefly toward the boy's coat. "Son," he said, his tone controlled but firm, "what's inside your jacket?" Marcus glanced down. Only then did realization flash across his face. "Oh." He exhaled slowly. "The toy." Jason raised an eyebrow. "What toy?" Marcus crouched slightly and gently reached inside Noah's jacket, pulling out the soft green dinosaur. The plush toy hung loosely in his hand, its stitched smile frozen in place. Marcus held it up. "This one." Jason's expression hardened slightly. "Did you pay for that?" Marcus shook his head immediately. "No, I must have forgotten." He spoke honestly, without hesitation. "I meant to. We were playing with it in the aisle, and it slipped my mind." Jason crossed his arms. "I see." His voice carried a tone that suggested he had heard similar explanations before. "We've had a lot of forgotten payments lately," he said flatly. Marcus remained calm. "I understand," he replied, "but it was just a mistake. I can pay for it right now." Jason didn't respond immediately. Instead, he reached for the small radio clipped to his jacket. "Front register," he said quietly into the device. "Can someone pull the camera from aisle 12 about 10 minutes ago?" While they waited, the tension in the entrance area slowly grew. Several customers whispered nearby, glancing toward the scene. Noah looked up at Marcus. His voice was small and confused. "Dad, what's happening?" Marcus placed a hand gently on the boy's shoulder. "It's okay," he said softly. "Just a misunderstanding." A few minutes later, another employee approached from the office hallway. His name was Darren Holt, the assistant store manager. Darren was a tall, thin man in his early 40s with narrow shoulders and neatly combed brown hair. His glasses rested low on his nose, giving him a constantly skeptical expression even when he wasn't speaking. Darren had spent most of his adult life working retail management, and years of dealing with theft and customer complaints had made him cautious and somewhat impatient. Jason leaned toward him and spoke quietly. "We've got a possible shoplifting situation." Darren glanced briefly at Marcus and Noah. "Camera footage ready?" he asked. Jason nodded. They stepped into a small office behind the customer service desk where a security monitor displayed the store cameras. Marcus stood beside the doorway holding Noah's hand. The screen flickered as the video loaded. Grainy footage appeared from the toy aisle. Marcus watched silently as the recording played. The video showed him kneeling beside Noah. Then it showed the moment clearly. Marcus picked up the dinosaur and placed it inside Noah's jacket. From the camera's silent perspective, the action looked deliberate. Jason folded his arms again. "There it is," he said. Marcus immediately shook his head. "No, wait." He pointed toward the screen. "We were playing. I told him to hide it." Darren adjusted his glasses. "That's not what it looks like." Marcus exhaled slowly. "There's no sound on those cameras, is there?" Jason shook his head. "No." Marcus looked back at the screen. Without sound, the scene truly did look different. A man placing merchandise into a jacket. Walking away. Darren turned off the monitor. "Sir," he said carefully, "we're going to need to handle this properly." Marcus felt Noah's hand tighten around his fingers. "We can settle it right here," Marcus replied calmly. "I'll pay for the toy." Jason's voice remained firm. "That's not how this works." Marcus looked up. "What do you mean?" Jason gestured toward the hallway. "We'll need to contact the police." Noah's eyes widened. "Police?" Marcus crouched again in front of him. "Hey," he said softly, forcing a reassuring smile. "Everything's okay." But inside, Marcus felt something heavier forming in his chest. 20 minutes later, a police car pulled into the Maple Market parking lot. The officer who stepped out was Officer Daniel Briggs. Daniel Briggs was 32 years old, with a solid build and a disciplined posture shaped by years of patrol work. His dark hair was cropped short beneath his police cap, and his clean-shaven face carried the calm seriousness typical of small-town officers. Daniel had grown up only 2 towns away and had joined the Willow Creek Police Department shortly after finishing the academy. Unlike some officers who enjoyed authority, Briggs preferred quiet situations and straightforward conversations. Still, procedure was procedure. Jason explained the situation briefly. Briggs nodded and walked inside. Marcus stood near the service desk holding Noah close. The officer approached slowly. "Sir," Briggs said evenly, "I'm going to need you to come with me to the station so we can sort this out." Marcus looked tired. "Officer," he said quietly, "I forgot to pay for the toy, that's all." Briggs nodded. "I understand." But he gestured toward the door. "We still need to document it." Noah looked up again. "Dad, are we in trouble?" Marcus hesitated. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. The boy's voice trembled slightly. "Dad, what did we do wrong?" Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came. So he simply squeezed Noah's hand and followed the officer out into the cold night air. Snow continued to fall softly over the parking lot as the police car door closed behind them. And somewhere inside the store, Lily Chen stood near her register, watching quietly. Something about the whole situation felt wrong, but she wasn't sure yet what she could do. A long night. The Willow Creek Police Station sat on a quiet corner 2 blocks away from the courthouse, a square brick building built sometime in the 1970s when the town had been growing faster than anyone expected. In winter, the building looked even more austere, its flat roof covered in snow and its single American flag moving slowly in the cold wind. The yellow lights above the entrance buzzed faintly as the patrol car carrying Marcus and Noah pulled into the small parking lot. Officer Daniel Briggs stepped out first and walked around to open the back door. Marcus followed, keeping one hand gently on Noah's shoulder as they entered the station. The warmth inside smelled faintly of old coffee and paper files, a scent common in small-town offices where years of paperwork had filled the cabinets. The front desk was occupied by Sergeant Linda Parker, the evening shift supervisor. Linda Parker was a woman in her mid-40s, tall and solidly built with a short auburn hair and a calm, authoritative presence. Her pale skin showed a few lines of fatigue from years of long shifts, but her sharp gray eyes still carried a watchful intelligence. Linda had joined the Willow Creek Police Department 20 years earlier after serving in the military police. The experience had made her disciplined, but also thoughtful. She believed strongly that fairness mattered in a small town where everyone's lives eventually crossed paths. She looked up from her paperwork as Briggs entered. "What have we got?" she asked. Briggs removed his gloves. "Possible shoplifting at Maple Market. Security footage shows the item being hidden." Linda glanced briefly at Marcus and Noah. Marcus stood tall but quiet. His hands relaxed at his sides while Noah clung to his father's coat sleeve. Linda's expression softened slightly when she saw the boy. "How old is he?" she asked. 5, Briggs replied. Linda sighed quietly, but nodded toward the hallway. "Process the report." Marcus was guided down a short corridor where a small holding area waited behind a metal door. The room was simple. Gray walls, a narrow bench along one side, and a small window covered with thick bars. It was not meant for comfort, only temporary holding while paperwork was completed. Marcus sat down slowly on the bench with Noah beside him. The boy's legs dangled above the floor. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Outside the holding area, officers moved about their duties, their voices echoing faintly down the hallway. Radios crackled occasionally, and somewhere a phone rang. Noah finally broke the silence. "Dad?" Marcus turned toward him immediately. "Yes, buddy?" Noah looked around the unfamiliar room. "Why aren't we going home?" Marcus felt the question settle heavily in his chest. He forced a gentle smile. "We just need to wait here for a little while," he said quietly, "but Mom's making dinner." Marcus nodded. "I know." Noah lowered his voice slightly. "I'm hungry." Marcus placed a hand on his back. "We'll eat soon." The truth was, Marcus didn't know when they would leave. Time passed slowly inside the holding room. After nearly half an hour, another officer walked down the hallway and stopped outside the metal bars. His name was Officer Kevin Doyle, a younger patrol officer who had joined the department only a year earlier. Kevin was 26, tall and thin, with sandy blonde hair and a restless kind of energy that made him seem constantly impatient. His narrow face and quick movements suggested someone who often judged situations before fully understanding them. Kevin glanced inside the cell. "So this is the shoplifting guy?" he said casually. Marcus looked up but remained silent. Kevin leaned against the wall. "Funny thing," he continued, speaking more loudly than necessary. "Every week we hear the same story. Someone forgot to pay." Marcus could feel Noah shift beside him. The boy was listening. Kevin continued speaking to Briggs, who stood nearby finishing paperwork. "Store's been having trouble lately. People think they can just walk out with whatever they want." Marcus kept his voice calm. "It was a mistake." Kevin shrugged. "They all say that." Noah looked up at Marcus again. "Dad, what does shoplifting mean?" Marcus didn't answer immediately. Before he could respond, Kevin muttered something else under his breath. Something less patient, less kind. Marcus reacted instantly. He gently placed both hands over Noah's ears. "Hey," he whispered softly to the boy, his voice calm and steady. "Let's play a game." Noah blinked. "What game?" "You count to 10 in your head." Noah nodded slowly. Marcus kept his hands over the boy's ears until Kevin walked away down the hall. Marcus finally lowered them. Noah looked confused but obedient. "Dad, did I do something bad?" Marcus swallowed. "No," he said firmly, "you didn't." Noah leaned against his side. The boy's voice became quieter. "Where's Buddy?" Marcus froze for a moment. The dinosaur had been taken as evidence back at the store. He looked down at the floor. "I think Buddy is staying at the store tonight," Marcus said carefully. Noah frowned. "But he's my friend." Marcus had no answer. Across town, Angela Reed was standing in the kitchen staring at the clock. The dinner she had prepared earlier sat untouched on the table. Steam had long since faded from the plates, leaving only the smell of roasted chicken lingering in the air. Angela held her phone tightly in both hands. She had called Marcus 3 times already. No answer. Finally, the phone rang. It was Officer Briggs. When Angela heard the explanation, her heart dropped. Within minutes, she had pulled on her coat and rushed out the door. Her car drove quickly through the quiet streets of Willow Creek, tires sliding slightly over patches of ice. Angela was not the kind of person who panicked easily, but the idea of Noah inside a police station made her chest tighten. She stopped first at the home of Thomas Delgado, a local lawyer known in town for handling small legal cases. Thomas Delgado was a man in his early 50s with dark hair streaked with gray and a thoughtful demeanor. Short and slightly round in build, Thomas carried himself with calm professionalism. Years earlier, he had worked in a larger city law firm before returning to Willow Creek to care for his aging parents. That experience had given him both legal knowledge and a reputation for helping neighbors when they needed advice. Angela knocked quickly on his door. When Thomas answered, she explained the situation breathlessly. Thomas listened carefully. "I'll make a few calls," he said. Meanwhile, early the next morning at Willow Creek Preschool, Emily Turner noticed something unusual. Noah's seat was empty. The small desk by the window where the dinosaur drawings usually appeared remained untouched. Emily waded through the morning attendance list before asking the office if Noah had called in sick. No message. A small feeling of concern formed in her mind. Later that afternoon, she decided to check with Angela after school. Back at the police station, the long winter night continued. The hallway lights dimmed slightly as the evening shift settled into quiet routines. Marcus leaned back against the wall with Noah resting against his side. The boy's eyes were half closed now, exhaustion slowly overtaking confusion. Outside the station windows, snow continued to fall gently across Willow Creek. Inside the holding room, Marcus stayed awake, listening, waiting, and hoping the night would end soon. The storm of headlines. The next morning, and Willow Creek arrived gray and cold, the sky covered by thick winter clouds that dimmed the sunlight across the quiet town. Snow still rested along the sidewalks, and thin smoke rose from chimneys as families prepared breakfast inside warm kitchens. For most residents, it was simply another slow winter Sunday before Christmas. But for the Reed family, the morning carried a heavy silence. At 6:30 a.m., the first copy of the Willow Creek Herald arrived at a small convenience store on Maple Street. The headline stretched across the front page. Local man arrested for shoplifting. Toy days before Christmas. Below the title was a short article summarizing the incident at Maple Market. The story described a man caught on camera placing merchandise into a child's jacket before leaving the store. The piece was written quickly, based mostly on the store's security report and the initial police statement. Without much context, the article painted a simple picture: a man attempting to leave a supermarket without paying for an item. That man was Marcus Reed. The article had been written by Nathan Carter, a local journalist in his early 30s who worked for the Herald. Nathan was tall and thin with pale skin and dark brown hair that often fell messily over his forehead. He had studied journalism in Cleveland before returning to Willow Creek to care for his aging mother. Nathan believed strongly in reporting facts quickly, but years of working under tight deadlines had taught him to rely heavily on official sources. He rarely intended harm, but sometimes speed replaced deeper investigation. By mid-morning, the article had spread beyond the newspaper. A local radio station repeated the story during its weekend broadcast. Social media posts began circulating screenshots of the headline, each share adding new opinions and assumptions. Some people reacted with anger, others with judgment. Very few knew the full story. Across town, Angela Reed sat quietly at the kitchen table. The plates from the dinner she had prepared the previous night were still there, untouched. The roasted chicken had gone cold, the mashed potatoes stiff under the dim kitchen light. Angela had barely slept. Her dark eyes were tired, her shoulders tense as she stared at her phone. Every few minutes, another message appeared. Someone had sent her the article. Another person had shared the headline. Angela placed the phone face down on the table. For a moment, she simply sat there, breathing slowly, trying to remain calm. She stood up and began reheating the food in the oven. Not because she expected Marcus and Noah home immediately, but because she refused to let the house feel empty. Meanwhile, back at Maple Market, the store had reopened for Sunday shoppers. Holiday music played softly through the speakers as employees restocked shelves and prepared for another busy day before Christmas. Lily Chen stood behind Register 3. Her dark eyes scanned each customer automatically as she rang up groceries, but her mind was somewhere else entirely. She had read the headline that morning, and it didn't sit right with her. Lily remembered clearly the moment Marcus and Noah had stood at her register the night before. The boy had been smiling shyly, his small hand pressed against his jacket. She remembered Marcus laughing gently with him. That wasn't how thieves usually behaved. During her break, Lily walked toward the store office where Assistant Manager Darren Holt sat reviewing inventory reports. "Mr. Holt," she said quietly. Darren looked up from his desk. "Yes?" Lily hesitated for a moment. I think I should tell you something about what happened yesterday. Darren leaned back in his chair. What is it? Lily folded her hands nervously. I saw them earlier in the toy aisle. The father and the boy. Darren raised an eyebrow. And? They were playing with the dinosaur, Lily said. He pretended to hide it in the boy's jacket like a game. Darren remained silent for a moment. You're sure about that? Lily nodded. Yes. Darren rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Well, he said slowly, the camera footage doesn't show that. I know, Lily replied, but I remember. Darren sighed. Look, Lily, the police are already handling the case. But if they misunderstood, Darren raised one hand gently. I appreciate you telling me. But right now, there's not much we can do. Lily left the office feeling uneasy. She knew what she had seen, and yet the story being told outside the store was completely different. Across town at Willow Creek Preschool, Emily Turner sat at her classroom desk during lunch break. The children were outside on the playground with another teacher, leaving the room unusually quiet. On her desk lay several drawings. All of them dinosaurs. They were Noah's drawings from the past month. Emily studied the pictures carefully. Each one showed the same friendly green dinosaur standing beside a small child figure. The name Buddy appeared at the top of several pages. Emily had heard about the supermarket incident that morning when another teacher mentioned the news article. The description of the boy involved had sounded familiar. Now, she was certain. She reached for her phone and called Angela. After a brief conversation, Emily listened quietly as Angela explained what had happened. When the call ended, Emily gathered the drawings carefully into a folder. If they need proof, she murmured to herself, maybe this will help. Later that afternoon, Angela drove to the small office of Thomas Delgado, the lawyer she had spoken to the night before. Thomas sat behind a wooden desk covered with legal papers when she arrived. Angela placed the newspaper article on the desk. They're making him look like a criminal, she said quietly. Thomas read the headline again. We'll address it in court, he replied calmly. At that moment, there was a knock on the office door. Emily stepped inside holding the folder. She introduced herself politely before handing the drawings to Thomas. These belong to Noah, she explained. He's been drawing that dinosaur every day for weeks. Thomas examined the papers. Interesting, he said softly. He placed the drawings beside the newspaper article. Sometimes small details mattered more than people expected. Meanwhile, in a modest house just down the street from the Reed apartment, George Miller sat at his kitchen table reading the same newspaper. George's old reading glasses rested low on his nose as he studied the article carefully. His weathered face tightened slightly. That boy wouldn't steal anything, he muttered to himself. George had known Marcus for years. He had seen the man shovel snow for elderly neighbors, repair broken fences without asking for payment, and walk Noah to the bus stop every morning. The article didn't match the man he knew. George reached for a pen and pulled a sheet of paper toward him. Slowly, in careful handwriting shaped by age, he began writing a letter. It described Marcus as he truly was, a hard-working father, a patient neighbor, a man who cared deeply for his child. George planned to send the letter directly to the court. Back in the Reed apartment that evening, Angela finished setting the table once again. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 glasses. The food she had reheated filled the small kitchen with warmth. But the chairs remained empty. Angela sat down quietly and folded her hands together. Outside the window, the lights of Willow Creek shimmered softly in the falling snow. The town moved on with its Christmas preparations. But inside that small apartment, the silence felt heavier than the winter night. The Christmas courtroom snow continued falling over Willow Creek the morning of the hearing, covering the courthouse steps in a thin layer of white that glowed under the pale winter sun. The courthouse itself stood in the center of town, a tall red brick building built more than 80 years earlier. Its stone columns and narrow windows gave it a serious, almost solemn appearance, especially during the quiet winter months. But that morning, the entrance was unusually busy. Local reporters gathered near the front steps with cameras and notebooks, drawn by the story that had spread through the town's newspapers and radio broadcasts over the past 2 days. Inside, the courtroom smelled faintly of polished wood and old books. Wooden benches lined the room, and sunlight filtered through tall windows, casting long, pale rectangles across the floor. Marcus Reed sat quietly at the defense table. He wore the same dark jacket he had worn the night he was taken from the supermarket, though now it had been carefully brushed clean. Marcus sat straight, his hands folded together in front of him. His face looked tired but calm. His deep brown eyes moved occasionally around the room, noticing the reporters, the curious townspeople, and the small group of neighbors who had come quietly to sit behind him. Beside him sat Thomas Delgado, the lawyer Angela had contacted earlier in the week. Thomas looked slightly rumpled in his dark suit, his gray-streaked hair combed carefully to one side. His expression remained thoughtful and patient as he reviewed the documents in front of him. Years of working as a defense attorney had taught him that calmness was often the strongest tool in a courtroom. Angela sat one bench behind Marcus. She held Noah close beside her. The boy wore a small navy sweater and sat quietly with his hands folded in his lap. His dark eyes moved nervously around the unfamiliar room, absorbing the strange seriousness of the place. The court clerk stood near the front of the room organizing files. Her name was Margaret Lewis, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair pulled into a neat bun. Margaret had worked in the courthouse for over 20 years and had developed a reputation for precision and professionalism. Her calm demeanor helped maintain order during proceedings, and even nervous witnesses often felt reassured by her quiet instructions. At exactly 9 o'clock, the door behind the judge's bench opened. Judge Harold Whitman entered the courtroom. Harold Whitman was 63 years old, tall and slender with neatly combed gray hair and sharp blue eyes behind thin rectangular glasses. His posture was straight and dignified, the result of decades spent working in law. Before becoming a judge, Whitman had served as a prosecutor in Cleveland, where he built a reputation for strict adherence to legal procedure. Those years shaped his personality, methodical, disciplined, and sometimes stern when evaluating evidence. The room stood as he entered. "Please be seated," Judge Whitman said calmly. Everyone sat again. Across the room, the prosecutor rose from his seat. His name was Daniel Crawford, a man in his early 40s with a narrow face and dark hair parted neatly to the side. Crawford carried himself with quiet confidence, his posture straight and his voice controlled. He had spent years building a career as a county prosecutor, known for presenting cases clearly and persuasively. He began by describing the incident. On the evening of December 19th, Crawford said, the defendant was observed placing merchandise inside a child's jacket before attempting to leave Maple Market without payment. The prosecutor nodded toward the courtroom screen where the security footage was displayed. The grainy video played silently. Marcus watched again as the camera showed him placing the stuffed dinosaur inside Noah's jacket. Without sound, the moment looked suspicious. Crawford spoke again. The action shown here indicates intent to conceal store merchandise. Thomas Delgado stood. "Your Honor," he said calmly, "the defense would like to note that the video contains no audio. The context of the interaction is not captured." Judge Whitman nodded slightly. "Proceed." Marcus was asked to speak. He stood slowly, his voice steady, though quiet. "My son saw the toy and liked it," Marcus explained. "I told him we would buy it. We were playing in the aisle. I told him to hide it like a game." He paused. "I forgot it was still there when we reached the register." The prosecutor responded quickly, yet the item remained concealed as the defendant passed the store exit. Marcus did not argue further. The stuffed dinosaur was then brought into the courtroom. The evidence bag crinkled softly as it was placed on the table. Noah saw it immediately. His eyes widened. "Buddy!" He slipped free from Angela's arm before she could stop him. "Buddy!" he cried. The sound echoed through the quiet courtroom. Noah's voice trembled as he pointed toward the toy. "Give him back!" Angela hurried forward and gently held his shoulders. sweetheart. But Noah was already crying. "Dad brought Buddy for me," he said through tears. "He promised." The courtroom fell silent. Even the reporters stopped writing. Noah wiped his eyes with the sleeve of his sweater. "If I don't have him," he said softly, "I'll be alone again." And the words hung in the air. Judge Whitman watched the child carefully. Thomas Delgado rose again. "Your Honor," he said, "there are additional witnesses." The first to stand was Lily Chen. She walked slowly to the witness stand, her posture slightly nervous but determined. Lily's small frame seemed almost fragile compared to the heavy wooden surroundings of the courtroom, but her voice remained clear. "I work as a cashier at Maple Market," she said. Judge Whitman nodded. "What did you observe?" Lily clasped her hands together. "I saw the father and the boy earlier that evening," she explained. "They were in the toy aisle. The father pretended to hide the dinosaur inside the boy's jacket. They were laughing." She hesitated slightly. It looked like a game. The prosecutor frowned but did not interrupt. Next, Thomas Delgado called Emily Turner. Emily stepped forward carrying a thin folder. She stood straight, her calm demeanor returning as she spoke. "I'm Noah's teacher," she explained. She opened the folder and placed several drawings on the evidence table. "They're all drawings Noah made in class." The images showed the same green dinosaur again and again. Each drawing had the same name written above it. Buddy. Judge Whitman leaned forward slightly, examining the pictures. The simple crayon lines of a child's imagination suddenly seemed very important. He looked from the drawings, to the small boy standing beside his mother, and finally to Marcus Reed. The courtroom remained completely silent. A small miracle. The courtroom remained silent after Judge Harold Whitman finished examining the drawings spread across the wooden evidence table. Outside the tall courthouse windows, snow continued to fall slowly over Willow Creek, soft flakes drifting down past the glass as if the entire town had paused to watch what would happen next. Inside the room, every person seemed to hold their breath. Judge Whitman remained seated behind the bench for a long moment, his hands resting lightly on the polished wood surface in front of him. His sharp blue eyes moved slowly from the drawings of the green dinosaur to the small boy standing beside Angela, and finally to Marcus Reed. Marcus stood quietly at the defense table, his posture steady despite the weight of the situation. His face remained calm, though exhaustion lingered beneath his eyes from the sleepless nights that had passed since the supermarket incident. Noah, meanwhile, continued staring at the evidence table. The stuffed dinosaur sat there in its clear plastic bag, its soft green fabric and stitched smile somehow out of place among the seriousness of legal documents and courtroom procedure. Judge Whitman exhaled quietly. Then, without warning, he stood up. The movement caused a slight ripple of confusion across the room. Judges rarely stepped down from the bench during proceedings, especially while reporters were present. But Whitman walked slowly around the side of the bench and down the steps toward the evidence table. The courtroom watched. He reached down and carefully lifted the dinosaur from the bag. For a moment, the judge simply held the toy in his hands. It looked small and harmless, nothing like the symbol of wrongdoing it had been treated as. Whitman turned toward Noah. The boy looked up, eyes still damp with tears. Judge Whitman walked across the short distance separating them. Without saying a word, he crouched slightly and held out the dinosaur. Noah hesitated. Angela placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "It's okay," she whispered. Noah reached forward slowly and took the toy. The moment his small hands wrapped around Buddy's soft body, his face brightened with quiet relief. He hugged the dinosaur tightly to his chest. The courtroom remained completely silent. Judge Whitman stood again and returned to the center of the room. He turned slowly to face the people gathered inside the courtroom, the lawyers, the reporters, the townspeople who had come to watch. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly across the room. "Sometimes," he said calmly, "our systems move very quickly. He paused, glancing briefly at the security footage screen still visible in the corner of the courtroom. They rely on procedures, on images, on pieces of evidence that do not always tell the full story. The judge folded his hands behind his back. And sometimes, he continued, in that rush to enforce rules, we risk forgetting the people those rules are meant to protect. He looked toward Noah again. Today, we nearly allowed a misunderstanding to convince a child that the world is unfair. The words echoed softly in the quiet room. Judge Whitman returned to his bench and sat down. Then he spoke clearly. The court finds that the evidence presented does not prove intent to commit theft. A small pause followed. Then the judge concluded, Marcus Reed is not guilty. For a moment, no one reacted. It was as if the entire room needed a second to understand what had just happened. Then Angela let out a breath she had been holding for days. Marcus lowered his head briefly, relief washing across his face. Behind them, George Miller sat on one of the wooden benches, his old hands resting on the cane he had brought with him. The elderly neighbor nodded quietly to himself, satisfied that the truth had finally been heard. Across the room, Lily Chen wiped her eyes discreetly. The young cashier had attended the hearing nervously, worried her testimony might not matter. Now she felt a quiet pride that speaking honestly had helped change the outcome. The reporters quickly scribbled notes as the judge dismissed the court. Within an hour, the story began spreading again across Willow Creek. But this time, the headline was very different. The Willow Creek Herald released an updated article written by Nathan Carter. The title read, Local Father Cleared in Supermarket Incident After Court Hearing. This new article told a fuller version of the story. It described the missing context in the security footage, the testimony from Lily Chen, and the drawings presented by Noah's teacher. As the story circulated, the tone of public opinion shifted. People who had judged Marcus days earlier now expressed sympathy and support. Some apologized. Others shared messages praising the court's decision. At Maple Market, store management quickly arranged a public statement. Standing outside the supermarket entrance, Assistant Manager Darren Holt addressed a small group of local reporters. We regret the misunderstanding that occurred earlier this week, he said carefully. Our store values fairness and respect for every customer. The statement was brief but sincere. Inside the store, Lily Chen returned to her register later that afternoon. A few customers recognized her from the news and thanked her quietly for speaking up. Lily smiled shyly but insisted she had simply told the truth. Meanwhile, back at the Reed apartment that evening, something much simpler and far more important was happening. Angela stood once again in the kitchen. The same dinner she had prepared days earlier now sat freshly reheated on the table. The smell of roasted chicken filled the small apartment once more. This time, the chairs were not empty. Marcus sat at the table across from Noah. The boy held Buddy tightly in his arms while his feet swung gently beneath the chair. Outside the window, Christmas lights from nearby houses reflected softly off the snow-covered street. Marcus looked at the dinosaur and smiled. So, he asked gently, "What's your friend's name?" Noah looked down at the toy. Then he looked up again with a wide grin. "Buddy." Marcus laughed quietly. "That's a good name?" Angela reached across the table and squeezed Marcus's hand. For the first time in days, the tension that had filled the apartment finally disappeared. Outside, snow continued falling over Willow Creek. Inside the small apartment, the Reed family shared their dinner together, and the room filled once again with something that had been missing for far too long: laughter. Stories like this remind us that the truth about a person cannot always be seen in a single moment, a short video clip, or a quick judgment. In everyday life, we often move too fast. We see something, we hear a rumor, we read a headline, and before we even understand the full story, we form an opinion. But real life is deeper than that. Behind every situation, there are human hearts, families, children, and dreams that deserve patience and understanding. Marcus Reed was not just a man in a news headline. He was a father who worked long hours to give his child a better life. Noah was not just a boy standing in a courtroom. He was a child who simply wanted a friend to hold in his arms. And sometimes it takes the innocent voice of a child to remind adults what fairness and compassion truly mean. This story teaches us something important about daily life. Before judging someone, pause for a moment. Ask questions. Listen carefully. Many conflicts in our communities begin not with bad intentions but with misunderstanding and fear. When we choose patience instead of suspicion and kindness instead of quick judgment, we make the world safer and more human for everyone around us. It also reminds us how powerful honesty can be. Lily spoke up when it would have been easier to stay silent. A teacher cared enough to bring a child's drawings to court. A neighbor wrote a letter defending the character of someone he knew was good. Small actions like these may seem ordinary, but together they create justice. Maybe the greatest lesson is about children. The way we treat people today becomes the world children learn to believe in tomorrow. If they see fairness, they will grow up believing in fairness. If they see compassion, they will grow up showing compassion. Each of us has the power to shape that example. So the question this story leaves us with is simple. When we see someone being misunderstood, will we stay silent or will we choose to stand for what is right? If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who might need this reminder today. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from and what lesson you took from this story. Your voice might inspire someone else. And if you enjoy stories that remind us about kindness, courage, and the power of doing the right thing, please subscribe to the channel so you never miss the next story. May God bless you, your family, and your home with peace, wisdom, and compassion. If you believe that truth and kindness still matter in this world, write Amen in the comments.